Have you ever missed someone who is still alive? Not because they died, but because they changed, because the relationship actually changed, and because the connection faded, also because the version of them that you once knew no longer exists in the same way you once knew before. And maybe that's one of the hardest kinds of grief to explain. And because when someone dies, uh, people understand your pain. There is a lot of condolences, there is a lot of support, even from friends and people who are not close to you enough. There is permission to grieve. But when someone is still alive, people expect you to move on quietly. They don't see the confusion that comes with mourning someone you can still text, someone you still see online, someone who still exists in the world, but no longer exists in your life in the same way they actually were used to. Hi, my name is Caleb, and this is the Try Deeper podcast where we talk about the mental health, emotional struggles, and the real things we go through but don't always say out loud. Hmm. And today, we are actually going to talk about grieving people who are still alive. This kind of grief can happen in some ways, many ways. Uh, I really hope you are good and welcome to this episode. All right. Okay. Sometimes it is a friendship that slowly fades. Sometimes it's a breakup that leaves emotional scars long after the relationship ends. Now, sometimes it is actually also grieving a parent who was physically present but emotionally unavailable. Sometimes it's losing that kind of version uh, of someone you thought would always stay in your life. And the most difficult part is there is usually no clear ending whenever this kind of relationship ends at this particular time and moment. There is no funeral, there is no final goodbye, there's no closure in this episode that neatly explains everything. It's just silence, distance. You notice the change with that. And because there's no official laws, you might even question whether you are allowed to feel hurt at all. But you know why? You know what? You are actually allowed to feel the hurt. It is important because grief isn't only about death, grief is about loss. There is a loss of connection involved here now. There is a lot of loss of comfort. There is loss of someone who used to be with you. There is loss of someone used to be the importance of this person in your life at the time. Sometimes people leave suddenly, and other times they slowly drift away until one day you realize the relationship isn't what it used to be. And that realization can deeply hurt. And especially when you still care about them at this particular point in time. One of the hardest things about grieving someone alive is that your mind keeps searching for the old version of them. You reply to memories, you keep replaying also these memories the same way, the most difficult times, old conversations, you revisit them quite as crazy as it can be. And you keep remembering the inside jokes. You keep thinking about the moments that once felt safe. And part of you keeps hoping things will go back to how they were. I really hope maybe you're watching this video and you are there in that particular time, or this is something that you have gone through in life, and this is just an explanation of how it felt when you were going through this particular process. I just want you to know that it is normal. And this is kind of things that really happen to people out there, you know? And, you know, you keep hoping, or some part of you keeps hoping that the relationship will get back. You know what? They will come back. I am sure about that. I am sure that they're just in a difficult point in their life, but they will come back to me. They love me. They care about me, but sometimes they don't. And accepting that can feel heartbreaking. A lot of people stay emotionally attached to potential, the potential that maybe one day the friendship will return, and maybe one day that relationship will actually heal, and maybe one day the person will become who you needed them to be. And hope can be beautiful, but sometimes hope also keeps people emotionally stuck, because while your heart is holding on to what was, life's life keeps actually moving. And let's talk about something deeper. Sometimes what you are grieving isn't only the person. Sometimes you're grieving who you were when you were with them. The comforts, the routines, the identity attached to that relationship. And certain people become part of your emotional world. So when they change or leave, it can feel like a piece of your life disappeared as well. That's why healing from these situations can be very confusing, because you are not just trying to adjust to the absence of the person, you are adjusting to the absence of a feeling. And the mind struggles with emotional inconsistencies, especially when the person is still around. Maybe they still watch your stories. Maybe they still occasionally talk to you once in a while. Maybe they act like nothing happened while you are still carrying the emotional weight of everything that changed. This creates emotional conflict, and most of this conflict happens because your heart is still trying to grieve someone that your eyes can still see. You still imagine them in your mind, in your heart, and in your life, and that can delay the healing. Another difficult part of this kind of grief is the lack of closure. A lot of people never get the conversation they hoped for. There is no explanation, there is no apology, no proper ending, just distance. And as a human being, we naturally want answers. We want things to make sense. And when there's no closure, things doesn't make sense. The brain keeps revisiting the situation, trying to solve it, and asking yourself so many questions. For example, what did I do wrong? You know, did they ever really care about me? Could I have just fixed it? Or could I have fixed it by myself? Why did things change? Is there a way that this can be fixed and we get back together? The earlier the better, the sooner. And it doesn't happen the way you expect. It hurts. But sometimes there's no satisfying answers to this. The healing begins when you stop waiting for closure for someone else and start creating it for yourself. That doesn't mean pretending it never happened or it never hurt. It means accepting that not every chapter of life actually ends neatly. Some relationships end with clarity and others end with confusion. Quite of confusion. Lots of them. And both can still be real losses. And this is especially true when it comes to family relationships. Some people are grieving parents who never truly understood them. Some are grieving emotionally unavailable fathers. Some are grieving mothers who were physically present but emotionally distant. And that pain is complicated because society tells us family relationships are supposed to feel safe automatically. But not everyone experiences that. It is not guaranteed. And sometimes the hardest thing is accepting that someone may never become the person you needed them to be. That realization can actually bring a lot of sadness and anger and even guilt in this particular time and moment, especially if you still love them. Because love doesn't always disappear just because someone hurt and left. And that's important to understand. You can love someone and still grieve the damage they actually caused. You can care about someone and still accept that the relationship changed. You can miss someone and still know are, they are actually no longer healthy for you. The emotions can exist uh, together. Now, something else people rarely talk about is how grief changes your behavior. When you are grieving someone alive, you might become emotionally withdrawn, just like when someone is actually dead and you knew them. You might struggle to trust people in this particular time. You might avoid getting attached again because part of you fears losing a connection. And another time, again, maybe in the hardest way this time round. You know what? Another thing I've learned is people learn things the hard way. When a particular thing has happened to you, you never want it to happen to you again. Sometimes people become actually colder after emotional loss, not because they stopped caring, but because caring started to feel dangerous. And that's why unresolved grief can quietly affect future relationships because pain that isn't processed often gets carried forward. This is why emotional awareness matters so much. Instead of ignoring that grief or distracting yourself from it, ask yourself honestly, what exactly am I grieving? Is it the person, the memories, the future you actually imagined with them, or the version of yourself that existed back then? The clearer you become about the loss, the easier it becomes to process it. And another important thing, stop invalidating your own pain just because someone is still alive. Your emotions are still and is still very real. Just because a loss isn't physical or isn't physically affecting you doesn't mean it isn't emotional. You're allowed to grieve. That one you are actually allowed to grieve, my friend. Friendships may end and it's not nice. Relationships can change. It is not good. It doesn't feel nice. People who became strangers, or people can actually become strangers in one night. Trust can actually be broken, and the relationship and friendship can change, and people will no longer be the same again. Their friendships will no longer be the same. Versions of people that no longer exist. You are allowed to grieve that as well. That pain matters a lot. Now, healing from this kind of grief takes time. It is not a flick of a switch. You don't just decide and then that's it. You don't just move and that's it. No, healing doesn't always mean getting over it. Now, most people talk about get over it. It's just simple get over it. You don't get over pain like that. It doesn't work like that. It is not logical now. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't think, and I don't understand why those people keep saying things like that, as if you just walk from point A to point B. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes healing simply means learning to carry the memory differently without constantly reopening the wound, without abandoning yourself in the process. And one of the biggest steps in healing is aligning acceptance, which doesn't happen today if you decide to start healing today. Not approval now, just acceptance. Not pretending it didn't hurt. You know, acceptance is not accepting that this thing didn't hurt. It's not trying to force the positivity. It is not trying to seek approval. Acceptance is acceptance. Accepting that people change, accepting that some connections are temporary. You know, acceptance is also accepting that not everyone else will stay the same version of themselves forever. Even you yourself, you change. Things are different. That's hard, but it's part of life. And slowly you begin to stop chasing what's gone and you stop replaying every moment or every memory looking for answers. And you stop trying to force all connections back into existence. You stop measuring your worth by who stayed or who left. And you begin focusing on yourself again. You are healing, which is your mind. And the most important thing, you is also your peace and your future. Because at the end of the day, grief is really love with nowhere to go. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is redirect some of that love back towards yourself. So if you're grieving someone who is still alive, be patient with yourself. That kind of pain is real, and that kind of confusion is actually real as well. And your healing deserves compassion as well. Maybe the real question is not who or why did they change? Maybe the real question is, how do I stop losing myself while mourning who they used to be? And that's what we are putting on the table today. I just hope this podcast episode has actually helped you and has actually opened your eyes to see what this thing is all about. I hope that listening to this podcast will heal you and help you to actually find healing within yourself, inside your heart. And if you like this podcast episode today, I will gladly ask you to share this episode to your friends and to people that you may be thinking they're struggling with this, because this can really help someone. And if you feel it really touched some part of your heart, please leave a comment here below and let's connect. Let's see how we can be able to be of help with each other. Thank you so much and see you in the next episode.